All right, I think
Yeah,
we're live.
James.
Hey Juan, what's going on?
Yeah, this is real. You said that very right. That's very right to say. Yeah, no, I just wanted to share with you guys, for everybody, that today we are celebrating life. We are celebrating the life of Daniel Castro. He's the son of Jose Castro. He's been in Cardano for a long time, a good friend of mine. His son has muscular dystrophy. I hope this is not invading any privacy on his side, but I just want to mention that it's important for us to consider appreciation of life, because in reality, we don't know how long we'll be here, any of us. So that's very important to keep in mind all the time. And the fact that things went to the point that they collectively agree, his son, dad, and family, that was a good way to keep going. And yeah, so this is part of what we do every day. We need to adapt like water. Life is to be celebrated every time we have anything, and we have to be ready for instability and ready for change. With that note, I want to start the meeting today about tokenomics. And yeah, let's do it. Okay. Today's book club for the book Emergent Strategy from Adrian Marie Brown. We are going to focus this meeting in tokenomics mostly. My name is Juan Sierra. I'll be facilitating the meeting today. And I have roles for this meeting. So anybody who wants to pick a role, be glad to do it. Timekeeper, I postulate Steve to do it. What do you think, Steve? Will you take that?
Yeah, as long as I can make my own exceptions, sure.
Okay. Okay. And then the whiteboard helper, someone that help us with notes. Maybe James can help us that.
I'll jump in. It's big shoes
Super.
to fill, Kevo, but I'll give it a try.
Thank you. And someone to check the chat would be great too. Or all of us can do it too, anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, perfect. No. But it will be too much for you to do, Steve. Besides everything you do every day for Gimbal Labs. Okay. Yeah, we mentioned yesterday that 1 hour is never enough, especially for this chapter. This chapter is a very rich in content chapter. So in the interest of time, I recommend that everybody look at the housekeeping guidelines session for the meeting, and that way we can, start the meeting as soon as possible. We'll do the agenda. Is about the same as yesterday. We'll do housekeeping items, which I already did, and then frame a conversation. Questions from continue with questions from intentional adaptation. Then we'll define a little more about chalks, slides, and shifts. And then the last item, next most elegant steps. Who wants to help me framing the conversation? This is a collective effort, remember. This book, actually, the whole book is a collection of quotes and efforts from from all of us. She actually mentioned, the author mentioned the importance of us to voice our questions, because the questions to the answers to the questions that she poses. So please, all yours.
I'm just going to say it because it seems like an obvious thing to think, but maybe these things just have to be said. But like Donald Rumsfeld, who was the former Secretary of Defense or something for George W. Bush, he's pretty famous at giving this press conference where he says, hey, he's answering a question. He's like, hey, there's the things you know, and there's the things you don't know. But then there's the things you don't know that you don't know. And, when we talk about intentional adaptation, it occurred to me, like when I was watching the video, that, like making a smart contract secure. There's the vulnerabilities you can see, but people think in terms of like, what if I did this? Like I think a lot of crooks start by having the random thought of, I wonder if I did this, what would happen? And then they follow the thought. I went down that road at one time with a friend of mine because I said, hey, like, we know it's all good, right? We know it's all one. And having that moral freedom, then why don't we just become crooks, to make money instead of kind of like having to have a job? And so we start thinking of all the ways that we could imagine to steal money. It was like, oh God, think of all the shit you'd have to learn just to be able to do that. And then we moved on to the next way to steal money. And it was like, oh fuck, I don't want to have to, dig tunnels. I mean, we'll like hire somebody to dig tunnels maybe, but and then we finally got down to like the one thing that we were both competent and willing to do to make money was steal bicycles, which, the market for used bicycles is just, it's not worth the time, because then you end up with all these bicycles and nobody will give you $500 for it, and yet people steal still, in spite of all of those problems that I just kind of saw in an evening with a friend of mine, people will still steal. They'd rather do that, for whatever kind of dopamine rush or endorphin thing. And to me, this touches very much on, what Juan was just saying. Somebody loses somebody, and the gentleman's son had muscular dystrophy, and you can kind of see that coming, but there's that normality of a human being that's in your space with you, that you care about, and then they're gone, and and like you can't prepare for like absence. It can only be experienced, and we can only put forward our intentions. We can't make them invulnerable to change. I mean, I have nothing but a gloomy outlook for the state of the world right now. But I stay involved in Cardano because if somebody somewhere will just keep the power going and keep the internet going, like even if only 2 state pools survive, whatever kind of cataclysm, but they've got the full node, this thing can go on, and like in that horrible kind of scenario where you can imagine what all painful bad things could happen, out of that of ashes, just 2 or 3 state pools that have the full node, right? We could rebuild in a completely different way, and that's the larger goal for me. It's just like, we need more stake pools. We need more smart contracts that are out there distributed in the same way that the stake pool network is distributed, right? Because of that scenario, because that's like all too likely to happen in so many places in the world right now. You know, like there's a Russian ship in the Atlantic moving towards North America, right? And no idea what's going to happen. We can do anything about it if it does happen. But what we can do is lay this foundation for something new coming out of it, you know, just like a fractal. So, and I think that kind of like lays a foundation then for all of the intentional adaptations that we try to enact and execute. Okay, that's one round.
Thank you, Steve.
And as the timekeeper, I think I will point out I think I used all
You're
the
okay.
time.
It sort of
Perfect on
takes us to a set of tenets or foundational rules.
Go ahead, A.
Oh, yeah. Good point, Steve. What that brought to mind is what I wrote in the chat, you know, emergent bugs, right? So over the last few days, maybe it's about a week now, Cardano suffered an anomaly which we're apparently yet to figure out what the hell it was, where the network basically stalled, and then basically, you know, a whole bunch of nodes reset. And, you know, just encapsulating all of this and the conversation that we're having now, and just thinking about security as well in general. I think about security a lot, but you know, hence why I brought it up in the in a previous call just before this, and probably in every call, right? I bring up security. One can never be 100% secure, right? You can only, you know, from a probabilistic standpoint, try and figure out parameters where you can then have a reasonable assumption of security, right? And what's interesting about this is in doing that, questions form intentional adaptation, right? Because in thinking about the threat model, you're thinking about what if, right? What if this, what if that? And this applies, you know, across the board from, you know, from biology even, right? As you know, people do research in that context. A really good point which is made by a doctor, heart cardiologist, recently, that's been making the rounds. You know, when he was asked by BBC newswoman, I guess, you know, whether something was verified. You know, he was talking about, I think, statins or something. And yeah, and understandably, the person, you know, the newscaster, not being, I suppose, you know, scientifically trained, was asking what she was required to ask, like, is this factual, kind of thing, right? And then, you know, his response was like, well, it's not really, because in science we try and come up to as close as possible, right? It's about probabilities. It's not about complete certainties. And so, you know, as fuzzy as biology is, security is even fuzzier, right? So again, the nature of questioning, you know, and thinking, what if, and playing, you know, that game and coming up with solutions to possible black swan scenarios, or even, you know, ones of less catastrophic scale. It's super important, right? Whether we're thinking about technology or biology, etc. That's how we become, you know, anti-fragile. And yeah, and it takes different forms, even in creativity, right? Stories are basically what ifs, right? So yeah, I'm optimistic, unlike Lockhart, in the ability for, I suppose, the humanities and technology and economics just, you know, coming into this beautiful interconnection. And you know, the book, you know, touches on this a lot, about just the interconnectivity of things, and value coming from that. And just a quick point here, the reason why, I think security is important that people usually don't really tend to think about is because there's a strong correlation historically with of security with value, right? Something that is secure is valuable. And so monetary value tends to, follow that as well. So it's just a quick thing that I wanted to throw in there.
Juan and James and A and I just came out of the live coding session, and we ended talking about security questions and guarding against this. And I think we've taken it a direction. Maybe, I don't know if somebody else had some other thoughts about the intentional adaptation questions. I'm sorry, Juan, I don't want to hijack it.
Not at all. Not at all. Please, thanks, Maxley.
I see a thread here,
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if we were the only ones seeing the thread, because we came out of that other conversation.
hopefully not. I mean, but this, I've never really kind of thought of stories and scenarios as UX UI, but like that's what I was thinking of as you were saying this, right? Like our ability to bring people into the story is a key component of the user experience of education, right? And it can help. We talked, about the potential role of a whodunit when it comes to connecting Plutus puzzles. A lot of the time, as long as learning goals are clear, that's enough of a story. I am learning this right now, and that's a thrilling experience. I want to be a part of that. But also in terms of bringing people in to understand threat models, that this is kind of done well, how like sex ed works in middle school, right? You present safely scenarios that might happen to kids, and you have them actually think through those, like as if they might actually happen. So this is, we could take a page from that pedagogy right here. But then it also gets me thinking about, going like what Steve said yesterday, this respect for the local. And I have the same experience. I have people in my life who are just such experts at being so integrated locally, paying so much attention. Don't listen to Steve's middle school stories. That's but it makes me think, right? Like local storytelling is sometimes called gossip, right? But gossip builds community. And when we come together and we know what's happening next to us, well, and this is the part where I'm just still trying to tease it out. Doesn't that connect to this idea of what's easy being sustainable, right? Like plants are not stressed out about if they should grow. It's easy for them to grow because it's sustainable. They're fully embedded in their local environment. So I'm just trying to put together the pieces of like, what does this have to say about tokenomics? If storytelling matters, if I can tell stories locally, if being aware, this is that connective thread right here, right? If I'm in tune with my neighbors, then I can expect some level of ease. There's a bit of the interoperability that's a core principle of Cardano here. I don't really have a point. I'm just trying to connect these different threads, and I feel like they do.
This is why, yeah, this is why I like. I mean, it's the story I tell. I'm really curious about what other people, what y'all say, for instance, about the gimbal, because when I tell about Gimbal Labs and then I say, yeah, we were on token, they're like, where's the value in it? It's like, well, the value in the gimbal is that you didn't get any gimbal unless somebody thought that you did something valuable. Right? And it's the only way that they're disseminated. I mean, from the very from the very second allocation, like after the industry, like in James and Julia and Roberto, they got some as founders because they started the damn thing. That's why they got some, and it's followed, all of the different allocations have gone to people who were perceived to have provided some value. That's a great story, right? Because that then implies that, hey, like me, who just kind of stumbled into it, you can stumble into it, and then you can start getting something for providing some value. And I said some shit that was real emotional a couple of weeks ago in one of these emergent strategy meetings, about what my past had been like, and moving around and always feeling like, I arrived in every town that I moved to, and in every relationship I left, feeling like I had empty pockets, right? Like financially and, on an asset level. And I've never felt like in all those places and all those relationships that I didn't provide value, and I was telling somebody else in the community about this dialogue, and he was like, well, you sound like you want something for nothing. I'm like, kind of missing my point. I mean, what do we think blockchain is about? It's putting power back in the hand of the individual, and agency, and possibilities to realize their personal value. And I don't know what other arguments there might be for creating a community token. Right? Like that is, for me, the argument. That's the story. But I do realize that that's become natural to me after 3 years of looking at blockchain almost. It's not a natural thought for my neighbors, right? It is not. And that's an interesting story on its own. How is it that they feel like they have no value unless they sweat for 8 hours? Why is that the only narrative about where value lies?
I think part of that value is a learned thing, and our culture doesn't offer real alternatives outside the money system to participate in. And anyone who talks about it is very quickly labeled impossible, and it's all automatically discounted quickly. So I think the question, rather than why haven't people created this, might be more, how can we create something that's so friendly that it's easy for them to join into? And then we'll see whether they hang on to those old cultural ideas or adopt the new, easier thing. I just keep thinking about the television remote. Age, class, background, experience, history, none of that mattered. When you got a remote control for the first time, nobody ever went back to changing channels by hand.
That might have been the beginning of the end.
Well, it's a wonderful education medium. I mean, video conveys information extremely well. Just a matter of who's producing it, right? So we finally have the chance to, what do they say, drive the means of production, finally, for real.
I think one of the things that's interesting, or I'm finding interesting at the moment, is I think it was James put up page 70. Decentralized work requires more trust building on the front end, but ultimately it is easier, more fluid. The number of old school bosses who are jumping up and down saying everyone's got to come back into the office. A lot of the old bankers and Elon Musk and various other people, they just do not seem to understand that the world has changed. They don't like the fact the status quo has shifted, and that the people doing the work and being creative can do it when they're not being watched by their bosses. And I'm very interested in finding out how things pan out over the next few years, because I think a lot of the old school bosses are going to get their comeuppance, because people are not going to want to sit in the office being watched. They're going to want to work where they feel happiest working. And the result will be they will leave the companies that don't trust them. Basically, that's what it comes down to. The old school bosses don't trust people to do the job if they're not watching them.
I'll just say, I lost a job in construction about 16, 17 years ago because I was the only white guy besides the boss. And there were these Mexicans, and nobody, I think that they understood English, but they always acted like they didn't, right? But there was like 4 of them. And they got pissed off because I would stand at my wall and hammer nails and talk to my wife on the phone, on my iPhone. And it just pissed them off. And you know, it was funny, you know, like when the boss was giving me shit, you know, before he let me go, I was standing there thinking, I was like, this is in South Central Texas, right? Where all the construction crews are Mexican. And I thought, you know, this old man here, who's a friend of my dad, he spent his whole life in construction using Mexican crews. And he can't imagine that a guy like me could work efficiently enough to satisfy him, and that maybe he could like hire more guys like me. He was scared of losing his Mexican crew because that's the way things got built down there. And it was really kind of weird. And I was like, okay. And this is like where I feel like I was ahead of my time. I was like, that's what I get for being white, right? I've been cruising along on white privilege, and you know, and this is just what the price I pay for it. And that's why I know I'm ahead of my time, the times that we're in, because I've had all these thoughts that have been spread around the world right now, and it doesn't mean they're true, right? Doesn't mean there couldn't be another way.
Super. Thank you, Steve. A?
Yo, we got some really good points. But also not just video or voice, but also in the chat here, in the text chat. I want to just respond to two actually, and they're actually by the same person. They're by Ohm. The first point, you know, Ohm, I'll just quickly read it out. Ohm said, gossip is a communication, well, yeah, is a communication about nothing productive. A system that facilitates communication around an objective gives purpose. I agree here, but I also disagree. I think there is maybe it's a little bit of the opposite of recency bias, where folks tend to undermine or not value information before a pattern has emerged, and so they would kind of just relegate it, I don't know, to the bin or something like that, right? But then if you actually, you know, continue gathering, you know, information which is being produced gradually, in my opinion, you know, you start to a pattern starts to emerge, right? Going back to emergence, right? A pattern starts to emerge, but you can only arrive at that point if in the first place you did not think that that information was trash, right? Before it became treasure, kind of thing. So yeah, just one quick point on that. The other point was, scroll down. Yeah, so quote, that bond this is in reference to some conversations about gossip and its value. Quote, that bond is an in-group, out-group thing and not essential for growth. And then some other stuff is said there, but I'm just going to highlight this particular point here where, you know, or the argument that in-group, out-group thing, like this collision or this conflict, this friction is not essential for growth. I think that's actually fundamental to growth, because in my opinion that's what propels things, right? That's the I don't know, sort of like molecules rubbing, or the friction that's caused, right? That's where energy comes from. In a similar way, nowadays we've got all these algorithms which are being tuned to optimize for sort of clickbaity or enraging content, right? Because that's shareable, right? And and in that context is in group and out group. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of take a step back and think of things from a kind of zoomed out perspective. And just quickly to the point that wait, who was making the point about yeah, Dan, about working from home and sort of the old way of thinking and how people are sort of still stuck in their ways. I just wanted to bring to the fore that it turned out in the last few days, Elon cancelled or shut down offices in Seattle, Twitter offices in Seattle, and in Singapore. This comes after he was highly critical and calling people who are working from home lazy and that they don't do any work, right? So, once he actually, I suppose, to his credit, once he was presented with the I suppose maybe both ends, the economic cost of real estate, and how how the cost benefit did not add up, because people actually being productive outside of this real estate that was being basically a liability, more of a liability than an asset.
Got it. Thank you. Ed.
Oh,
So-
yeah, I put myself behind you so you could jump in because I know that. Oh, sorry, Juan.
No. You can go.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think what I was referring to was more about gossip by itself. Like there's the environment that the author of this book comes from has embraced radical honesty for some time, and went through a great deal of effort to be inclusive in that way. And I feel like as a general societal thing, we've seen what happens when gossip is the way things happen, which is where we're at with the social media situation and things like TikTok and Instagram. Young girls are just posting pictures of themselves at the beach all day long, hoping someday to get a modeling contract out of it or something like that. And I feel like discussing, highlighting, understanding maybe, but mostly it's about creating in-group, out-group behavior. And it seems to me that most gossip is about feeling close to someone next to you at the expense of the object of your gossip or everyone else. And I feel like the architecture of an interactive system can have a lot to do with how that works. And obviously I have some ideas about the thing I've been trying to create. And I think it addresses this by framing all of your interaction around an objective, something you need, something you want. even if you want companionship, or if you want to gossip, that's also a want and need. You can satisfy that. But putting it in terms of creating a thing that has an objective, and then you go do that, and that's the only way you interact with the system, is very different than what I might call the WALL-E. You know, if you've ever seen that movie, the end result of humanity is to be a bunch of floating fat people in a giant cruise ship. So left to their own devices to just chit chat and chitter, humans devolve quickly into that kind of going nowhere, nothing. But we seem to be spurred on to our best when we have an objective to all reach together. So that's more of what I meant about the in-group, out-group problems with just gossip on its own.
And I use the word gossip in the chat just because, like, to raise the question of like, how do we harness that energy? And it's making me think, oh, like there's that, there's an Eleanor Roosevelt quote, maybe apocryphal, but she talks about like the difference between talking about ideas, talking about events, and talking about people, and kind of like the hierarchical, the way we situate ourselves. And the truth is, and this, I raised my hand just to kind of think along with what Dan was saying. I'm not sure that those powers that be that you're talking about, Dan, have anything to worry about. And my evidence for that is right here within the blockchain industry. What's the ratio of people inside this industry, of people who want to get rich quick versus who want to work hard? What's the ratio of people learning how to develop tools on this revolutionary technology compared to the number of people hanging out in Twitter spaces? Often not making much progress, right? As long as those are the status quo, power structures have nothing to worry about. I'd like our work to result in giving those people something to worry about. I think education is the most important. Let's push people towards taking on that ownership and maybe making real progress towards where this tech can push us.
Right. And that brings the idea of bringing nature as a way to solve problems, as the book states, and how the going back to basics and see what really incentive people to do things, and what is the essence of the value they give to something that they dedicate their time to, and as a way to get a retribution. So I mean, I think about that, never intentionally, but I think about that constantly, and I always go back to education. Education is the only way that you get incentives. That you don't get the incentives right away, but you know, education is very expensive. But try ignorance. You know, try ignorance is very, very much expensive. I happened to be in a board meeting last week, or at the beginning of this week, and it was funny that the candidate running for the position, my community was changing board members. One of the candidates was basing his platform in bad talking the board and the things that they do, and too many things. So my way to see it was like, why don't you think about, I mean, if you are clear on the things that they need to do better, why don't you run through the board and help them, you know, instead of back talking to them. Anyway, going back to what we are talking here about tokenomics, and actually we still have 4 minutes. Tokenomics, it needs to come from inside out in terms of not forcing it. I think it's a process, but the definite process to have fruits on is education, for the way I see it. And we have the tools. We have the 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 incentives. So it's a matter of time to be able to weather whatever comes in the instability that we are feeling right now. You know, we are in the right track. That's what I'm gonna say about that. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate what you're saying, Juan. I think it underscores what James said. And, you know, like I watched this video this morning and the guy was pointing out, the Army of Spies guy, and he was pointing out how easily, you know, that in the crypto space, right, which was all about decentralization, you know, self-agency, self-sovereignty over your own money and everything, that what's become the driving metric in crypto is total value locked, right? You know, which is, you know, it's just a new goodbye old banker, hello new banker, you know. And that's, I think that's because, you know, people don't, they might have liked crypto as a concept. Yeah, it's fucking banks, but they don't keep educating, right? The education has to be ongoing, and you have to think about it repeatedly to be able to have the conscious awareness to recognize when, no, you're pulling us back in the old world, you know, with a new skin, and that it's the necessity of repetition, right? I mean, and that's what education is, you know, until it becomes skill and becomes automatic.
Right.
I thought Matthias was gonna talk, but I think he's basically just typed in his contribution to the conversation. Yeah, within the next 30 seconds. Yeah, I think yeah, I quickly want to talk about biomimicry, mimetics. But before that, yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. I agree. You know, BNL, the Amazon equivalent in Wally, you know, is definitely, you know, designed around the idea of sloth, right, and optimizing for that. And definitely gossip, you know, has that negative potential, like any weapon, right? But at the same time, you know, it can be used for good, right? If you think of, you know, from a sort of hunter-gatherer standpoint, it was through gossip that you know, health or even just different fruits or, you know, whatever, like, you know, this person died this way, so like don't do that kind of thing, right? That's how, you know, information kind of percolated through society. So, you know, but then as you said, it can be used for bad, you know, people spreading, you know, false rumors, etc. Yeah, so I think, yeah, going back to, I think what Juan was saying, biomimicry is super important. You know, look into nature, and also like James said, you know, the, you know, plants don't stress, right? Because, you know, they're just chilling, you know, within the environment. For ever since I was a teen and I discovered biomimicry, I was like, man, this is it. So, you know, I've been, you know, a strong uh proponent, or, you know, supporter of, you know, of thinking that way, and suggesting that others, you know, consider, you know, looking to nature for you know, how it does things. Yeah, so biomimicry. And then lastly, mimetics. I think it's super important to think about the value of stories, right? You know, sort of to bring it back to this, right? We are mimetic beings, and as James was saying, if we do what we set out to do here, right, the existing power paradigm or power structures ought to be concerned, or at least, you know, we'll make those obsolete. But a great way that we arrive at that is through culture, right? We culture, stories, etc., fashion, music, etc., is upstream of politics, right? So we get that right, we recode, re-engineer how humans think about value, right? Going back to what Steve was saying about you know, even a number of people are saying about, you know, the limitation of, you know, people thinking, oh, people basically taking the scarcity mindset, right, and thinking only these particular things are of value, you know, nothing else, right? We're in a position to actually start to unlock new modes of value creation. Storytelling is one, right? There's a great psychological benefit to it, which is difficult to quantify, but you know, that's definitely there. And through this technology that, you know, that is now emerging, we're able to do that, to, you know, compensate and incentivize, you know, more creation of things which are of benefit to society, but that historically have been really difficult to quantify and, you know, subsequently, was a byproduct incentivize. I went over 3 minutes, I apologize, but I hope that was of value.
By that definition, I appreciate gossip very much. I was thinking more in how it's sort of being practically applied in Western culture right now. But storytelling, information sharing, critical. I mean, to wit, notice how much stories coming out of Serbia in the 90s when they're all getting bombed. People were routinely risking their lives to go down to basements and watch plays get put on. You know, like that was what kept a lot of people going. And I think it, you know, huddling around the fire, telling stories is very deep in us. But it seems like the way to facilitate that, we could keep our current system and impose a cultural element on the outside, like saying cool people tell stories, or we could, in the system where we interact, have that as a, you know, create the conditions where storytelling, where people can organize around storytelling and plays. You know, it seems like people do that anyway. That's how nature works on its own. So if we just create the foundation where people can do that easily, then we don't have to tell them to do it. They're going to do it because that's what we do.
You know, along these lines, like, years ago, I can't remember when this was. I read an article about some people who've been researching teenagers, and this is going to feel real close for James, I think, because they, you know, like they're in school together all day long, right? And what they were doing was talking to these kids because they were in school together all day long, and then as soon as they got home, they were on the phone talking to the kids, their friends that they'd been in school with all day long, and they were trying to figure out why they needed to, you know, come home and get on the phone with the people they'd been with all day long. And, you know, they came to the conclusion that it was part of that youthful need to confirm reality, right? You know, like, I felt this way when the teacher said that. What did you feel like? You know, basically going through those kinds of conversations. And I've noticed that, you know, like I referred yesterday to, you know, what Kelly does here in our local community. And she gets on these conversations sometimes, and we'll be out somewhere and I'll be standing around while she's having conversation with people. And I'm thinking sometimes I don't know if it's my cynical side or my grouchy old man shit. I'm like, fuck, who the fuck cares? You know, I mean, really, why are you gossiping with these people? And, you know, and I've never said to her that what I think she's doing is gossiping, right? But I mean, it's been 5.5 years she's been in this kind of highly visible space. And it's the same dynamic that they were talking about in those teenager research people. You know, it's confirming reality and broadening perspective, you know, and like we had a hard reaction a few years ago to a thing a guy was doing with one of these nonprofits in town. And just because of what's happened in the last few months, we've had to reassess that, hey, he actually wasn't being the dickhead we thought he was being. He wasn't being the asshole we thought he was being. And that's, you know, it's number one, humbling. And number two, puts a different light on all of this that we're talking about here. You know, you know, and this gossip and versus education, and you know, and I at some point in the things that were said in the last few minutes, I remembered, you know, and some spiritual thing I was doing, you know, coming across the idea that, hey, it is all education, right? Everything in your experience is education. You have to choose to view it that way, right? That's the trick. Otherwise, it's just gossip, or it's just a waste of your time.
Yep.
All right, I'm done.
We still have 3 minutes for most elegant steps. And I really wanted to go with the most elegant steps by remember us to keep always an intentional mindset, celebrating life. Thing is we need to adapt like water. And you know, life brings with many things on it that we always have to see the positive and adapt. And you know, we are talking here tokenomics, and I think more than tokenomics is incentives, and we'll really look for how we, you know, people around us is incentivized to do things in a positive way, not like Steve was saying at the beginning. But yes, and also I wanted to honor the life of my friend's son, Danny Castro, who passed on Saturday after having a life of a lot of dedication and a really intentional way to live life in not a better way, not the best way. But yeah, we need to be happy about things that we have, appreciate everything we do, and no regrets, as our author says. I live a life of no regrets. Thank you for being here. Back to you, James.
Kick it to A for last words today. Juan, thanks for the facilitation. This was great.
Yeah, I'll attempt to keep it super short. Yeah, so I'm just about to hopefully go out in the rain to a crypto meetup. I suppose just to add on to what Juan just said, it's important to engage with the what ifs of, you know, meat space. You know, because there's a lot of fuzzy noise or information that exists there, and it's really rich. Like, one thing that I've really appreciated post-pandemic is engaging with people in person. It's very different to on video, because I don't know, there's something I'm yet to like distill it down. So I would you know, I would urge folks to you know, as an elegant next step, to think about just physical space and engaging with folks, because there's an intangible quality to that which is difficult to pin down and, you know, tell your boss, or, you know, try to validate to someone using some metrics.
Well said. I feel like I'm personally gathering fertilizer from these calls. I don't know exactly what it's going to grow yet, but it feels really good to be figuring out some of these pieces. And I really appreciate this chance to gossip together, or whatever we call this that we're doing here. Thanks, y'all.
Knowledge sharing.
Knowledge sharing. Yeah. All right. Hey, looking forward to next week, picking these things up. A lot of good threads going on. Don't be a stranger in Discord if you have follow-up thoughts about any of this stuff. Looking forward to seeing you all next week. Have a good day.
Thank you.